When I got tattoos, I just loved the way my body looked. It almost was like a way for me to fall in love with myself all over again, the way that I used to love myself when I was little, when no one cared about what you looked like or who you were supposed to be, right? When you just had that childish innocence of exploration, non-judgment, we just wanted to be ourselves.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Lost and Found, a podcast all about the process of creative recovery. From those low lows to the high highs, this podcast explores what it means to be a truly creative person and how creativity is a superpower that we all have that we can use for our own well-being and transformation. I'm your host, Brooke Eston. On today's podcast, we have someone so near and dear to my heart. Diem is a highly empathetic first-generation American who was raised by her grandmothers in Reno, Nevada. Although she always expressed an interest in the arts, stigma, fear, and overprotection led her to pursue other professional paths. At the young age of 17, she began working as a hostess at the iconic Cliff House restaurant, the same restaurant that I worked at during university. The connection between us was immediate, and our relationship blossomed. We started having painting dates that continued for years and helped to reawaken her dormant creativity. She continued on her hospitality journey and made her way to New York City, where she worked her way up to managing restaurants, banquets, events, production, and eventually went on to work with a variety of private creative entrepreneurial clients, where she quickly became their highly versatile and adaptable right-hand woman. Her non-traditional upbringing, including a very difficult and at times non-existent relationship with her biological parents, led her to the work of personal development, trauma recovery, and ultimately, she found and embodied her creative expression. Today, Diem continues to explore the boundaries as she travels the world, continuously learning, building new skills, and filling up her own love tank. In this conversation, we explore her story as a first-generation immigrant with sensitive and creative tendencies who was stripped of her creative identity due to generational family trauma and unrealistic expectations and projections. Diem shares how she found her way back to her creative self through the timeless art of tattooing, writing, and painting. I am so thrilled to welcome my dear soul sister and tattoo buddy. I got both of these tattoos with her. Diem, welcome to the show. Welcome to The Art of Lost and Found, Diem. It is such a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
So I wanted to start off each episode with a little peek into your relationship with your own creativity. So normally it stems in childhood because it's just part of your normal existence as a child. The way that children learn and explore the world is through following their curiosities and by experimentation. And they don't have the wet blanket of shame and self-doubt and all of these things that so many of us end up carrying once we get to adolescence or pre-adolescence, when we're often told that our creativity has no value or that our skills are not at the level that they need to be. So I would love to go back into your relationship with your creativity and where it started. And if you could tell me a little bit about your childhood and how your relationship with your creativity began. And then included in that is whether or not your home environment was supportive of you exploring your creativity, or whether or not that felt like a hindrance to you.
Okay. So I grew up in a very rural place in Nevada called Sparks, and I grew up with my grandmother and my great grandmother from a completely different Vietnamese generation than the one I grew up in. Um, as far as when I grew up, I didn't have a lot of toys. Like I wasn't like the kid that like got to play with like tons of Legos or Barbies or dolls. So I think that my creativity kind of like peaked or like was kind of a part of me in my life when I had to find creative ways to like play, whether that was like crayons or markers. Um, it's funny because I think of like this time where I think I watched like an episode of Rainbow Bright. Like I was obsessed with Rainbow Bright. I thought she was like such a badass. All the characters in there were so cool. And I wanted like a horse of my own that she had as like her best friend. So I oftentimes like pretended my couch was my horse and I would like ride the top of my couch, and then I would take like my markers and crayons and I used to draw like versions of like Rainbow Land, right? But then I would cut like little things out and then use them as like things that you can move on the land that I created. So like it was very evident at a young age that like I loved drawing or coloring. Like I had tons of coloring books, So as far as my grandmother and my great grandmother, I think for them, because they worked really hard to give me what was considered a normal childhood as one could have, and they didn't have a lot to like, we didn't have just like crazy income for them to buy me a toy every week or, just what children have as far as like being able to play, because I had to like self-soothe. I didn't have siblings. I had to like find creative ways to be able to learn how to play by myself. Um, so they got me a lot of coloring books. So in that sense, I think they were supportive of like, children like coloring books and children like, movies, like different like Disney movies or books. They bought me like a lot of really cool fairy tale books, and I was obsessed with Disney. Let's get real. Like I was a little girl that was like, I want to be Cinderella. I don't want to have nice friends and birds coming in. So yeah, it was really great when I was younger, but I noticed that as it developed more, like say for instance, I had art classes in elementary school or I had art classes in middle school. I loved it. I was just like, oh my God, give me more art. This is so incredible. I loved painting in school, drawing in school, charcoal. And then I started to notice a shift, I think, in the more that I liked art, the more my grandmother and my great grandmother needed to, they almost like structurally wanted me to find a balance between art and or my creativity and more like schoolwork, right? They're like, okay, you can do that, but you also need to do this. So it stopped being this like kind of, I think, supportive entity and more of like, you can't do your art unless you are a good child when you get good grades and read your book and do your things. Like they separated the two. Like it wasn't like I could have both and be sublimely happy. It was like a separation. And I think it's because in Asian culture, for me and my family at least, I can't speak for every Asian culture, but my family was quite strict, and in order for us to be considered successful human beings in this life, we had to be really diligent about our schoolwork, get good grades, graduate, have a great job. So I think the idea of creativity and or any sort of art placement, like whether like going to school for art was like not a thing. We needed to go to school for like finances or pharmacy or engineering. And when I was like, well, I really like art, they started to realize, no, this is not what you should want. And so it started to become a thing where instead of it being so free for me, like freeing, it started to become something I would keep in secret, like in my room. And it started to become an outlet for me of self-expression because the older I got, which, when we get older and our hormones kick in, we want to find ways of expression. And if we're in an environment where we're not able to freely express our emotions in a healthy manner, what other ways do we want to express emotion? And for me, it was strictly within my artwork. So my artwork for a very long period of time was like a depiction of what I was feeling. So if I was feeling sad, I would paint it or draw it or write it. If I was feeling extremely happy but couldn't share it, same thing. The colors in my drawings and paintings would change into like more brighter colors, more less like kind of contrasty, darker moods. And I didn't really know that. Like I couldn't probably talk about that then, but I could see and reflect back on it now. Like, wow, like it was completely an outlet for my like emotional expression, because I grew up in a family where women cannot express their emotions. Like whether we have emotions or not, we don't talk back. We don't say how we feel. We don't ask questions. We just say, it's like a very like, because I said so mentality. It's because I said so, you can't do that. And I was always the curious kid that's like, why can't I do that? Why can't I go explore? Why can't I, it was just so strict all the time. And so my artwork for me was really important to me to have, because how else was I going to express my emotions? And bottling up feelings, which I've noticed in the long term, right, in my adolescence, adulthood, is not healthy for me. And so it was the only like saving grace for me to feel like I didn't have to bottle everything up all the time. So I would say that probably like the beginning story of how my artwork for me became very like a part of who I am. And a lot of it was also influenced by music. Like I can't paint or draw without some sort of musical outlet. So art for me was also music. I've never painted or drew something that wasn't moved, like I wasn't moved by music of some kind. Like I've never done anything in silence like that before. I was always inspired by some form of like musical, like I just felt like the music spoke to me, and like all those artists that were singing angsty things, I was like, I feel that and I need to paint and draw that too. So that was like my way of coping with my current environment in my world.
When you started to realize and understand the therapeutic benefits of having an art practice, was that something that you were conscious of in any way, or that was something that only through kind of retrospectively looking back at your life that you understood that maybe on an intuitive level?
I mean, I knew it was a form of self-expression for me, but I didn't really understand like the therapy behind it, right? Because it's like a form of therapy. But I would have never been able to talk to you about this if I was still a teenager, or, not even maybe in my 20s would I have really realized how important art was for me. I think at one point we had a conversation in our friendship where you considered me like a creative person. And I was like, I don't think I am. What are you talking about? I'm not an artist or a creative person like you, like I'm just more calculated. But there was so many signs that showed, yeah, you're a pretty creative person, like, and I look back on it now in retrospect, like after years and years of, I think through my own journey of understanding myself and growing, right? Where I was like, it's such a huge part of my life. I think if I didn't have it, I would be a completely different character or being. Maybe I would have had been able to communicate the way that I do now. Like maybe it would have, if I didn't have that outlet, what was I really going to suppress inside for so long, and how would it have come out later, right? I wouldn't know, because I thankfully wanted to keep that a part of my life as long as I could, and I just didn't know why. I couldn't say like, oh, I keep this a part of my life for this reason. Now I can say that, but then I just wanted to be a part of it in every way, whether it was like go to, when I tried to put myself through college, I took art classes because I loved it so much. If I'm going to go to school, I might as well go to school for things I'm very curious about and love. Art history, I took a figure drawing charcoal class, which I loved, like learned perspective, learned how it was like integrated in art history, like I was like, there's so many connections here that I loved so much. And so, but I never really understood why. Like I never understood the why did I love it so much aspect. I just knew that it made me feel good every time I immersed myself in that world. It made me feel better, or like more at home or settled, calm, when you're trying to balance like the chaos of the world around you.
Yeah.
So,
So let's talk a little bit more about what you touched upon around creative identity. So when I remember that conversation that you and I had, where from my perspective, of course, you're an artist, you're a creative person. I didn't realize that was something that was up for debate just like you're a woman. Of course. Yes, I know. Is that something we need to discuss? So when you were hesitant to really claim that creative and artistic identity, what was going on for you that you felt, I mean, especially what you just shared about your childhood and feeling like that was a really core part of what you needed in your life? It helped you understand and process your emotional experience. And it gave you almost like a refuge that you could retreat to that was just your private creation space. So, what happened that ruptured that connection that you had from having a strong creative identity to then fast forward into your adult years, that when I made that comment, it was something that you recoiled from and kind of had this reaction? The way I remember it, your reaction was like, oh no, I'm not good enough to call myself a creative or good enough to call myself an artist. So tell me a little bit about where and how that rupture and that kind of division happened in you. And then I would love to get to a place where we could explore how you rebuilt that relationship.
It's interesting because, again, I wouldn't be able to talk about this had I not took a lot of time to reflect on my life, right? Like when you sit back and you think about the times of your life and all, you're almost connecting the dots, right? Like it took a while to get there, but you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I think when people would be like, are you an artist? And I would always preface it like, no, I'm not good enough for that. But the narrative of not being good enough existed so much so in my world, right? Because I also grew up in an environment where I was constantly compared to like my cousin, my aunt, who's valedictorian, went to get her master's in Paris, my cousin who's a scientist, my other ones that are engineers, my aunts and uncles who are pharmacists. Like I always constantly felt like I was too different because I was treated like I was different. I was probably the only person in my family whose parents didn't raise her because they weren't around. So I was raised by my grandmother and my great grandmother. Thank God, I love them. They're amazing, strong women. But I can't blame them for not knowing, not realizing like that what they're doing could also hinder my own progression, right? They only knew what they knew how to do was to survive as an immigrant in America. And they're from two different generations. I didn't get the generation of my mom or my dad. I got the generation of my grandmother and great grandmother. Vietnamese generations, like beyond me, that only knew how to survive in America. And the ways to survive was to do well in your education, make money for yourself, and find a partner where you didn't have to go through life by yourself, right? But if we fast forward in the year 2021, women have progressed like significantly in the generations after, right? Like women have progressed in such a way where we no longer feel like we have to have the conditioning of a man in our life to feel whole or complete or that we can survive in this world. We can 100% do that on our own, right? And I was conditioned to think that I couldn't be that woman. I was conditioned to think that I had to be the type of woman that needed someone to complete me, help me. And I was constantly compared to the other women in my family who were extremely academically amazing. Like they were just amazing. And they did everything right, right? They got married, they had kids. But you look back on it now, some of them are divorced. Some of them didn't do anything they wanted to do in their career as far as their degree, And when I started realizing, that I was constantly being compared, I didn't realize I was compared, right? It correlated into my art. So I basically thought of being an artist as like the really insane artists that you see have gallery showings or sold a painting for like $150,000. Like I thought those were artists and I was just me, someone who's expressing my own expression of self, of my own being, right? And I also think I correlated it with I was so afraid, I think, to put myself out there in that sense because I don't think I was ready for the amount of criticism that people get when you're a real artist. Because I think I got criticized all the time that inherently I was exhausted. I didn't want to put my artwork out there and have someone criticize my art because then I took it as that they were criticizing me because I put so much of my emotional self in my art, right? I create art based on how I feel. And so if I have someone that's looking at my drawing or painting or writing and say, I don't like that, that's like not cool or whatever, as people can often do when they criticize anything, right? It would, if I felt like it would have been a personal attack on me. And I wasn't ready to own up to the fact that that was me as an artist because I wasn't ready for people to criticize things that I thought were beautiful about me, like being able to express my emotion in my artwork, you know? So when you're like, oh, you're an artist, I'm like, whoa, no, I'm not it came from an insecurity of not being confident in myself, of not understanding my self-worth or value as a human being. It came from a place of like, I'm never going to be that type of artist. I'm just the person that just makes art for me, you know? And I didn't know that I could make art to share it with people because I didn't know that my art could resonate with other people in that capacity because I thought it was, since it was so personal, no one could possibly understand because I felt so misunderstood for so long in my own family and my own friendships and relationships even, you know? So that was really tricky for me because I suppressed art for a long time. So I think I had a span where I think it was almost 10 years where I didn't paint or draw anything, right? Like I'd never painted anymore. I never drew anymore. I like wrote down, you know, random thought process in my journal or something. But even then I wasn't like actively journaling. It wasn't like a practice. My practice of art was no longer there. But something sort of beautiful happened in that part because what I thought was suppressed wasn't, because it came out in this different type of artwork, which I wouldn't have
Your
known
tattoos.
until later, you know? So
Yeah.
it was crazy. Like, as much as I thought I was like getting rid of art in my life because I wasn't good enough for it anymore, like it just, you know, um, it was always around, whether
Yeah.
I thought it wasn't or not. It was always there for years. Like I've been getting tattoos since I was 23, you know, and I know that period really well because I wasn't painting, I wasn't drawing, and I felt really shitty about it. I felt awful about it all the time. And yet I somehow subconsciously still found a way to create artwork, you know? And I'm like, oh my God, I think about it now. I'm like, it's so much embedded in who I am because it was so magical for me growing up when I was like 5 years old and wanted to draw something that I thought was beautiful.
As you were talking about the artistic identity and how that showed up in the context of your family, it seems like your family subscribed to the cultural narrative that, in my opinion, far too many people subscribe to, which is art and creativity is about money. Either you have none of it and you're suffering so much in service of your art that you couldn't possibly survive. Like maybe your grandmother's thinking she can't be an artist because it's not safe for her. It's not viable for
Totally.
her. Meaning,
Totally.
like, if she becomes an artist, she's just going to suffer and eventually die penniless, kind of one extreme. And then the other extreme that you were talking about, not even with your grandmothers, but that you brought up around your perception of an artist is somebody who is wildly financially successful. Like they sell paintings for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And there's either you're totally broke, suffering artist, or you're successful beyond anything that even makes any sense. And you're part of the artistic elite.
Yeah.
So having these two very extreme visions of what an artist is, I'm curious for you because you existed in between there, right? Like your art didn't make you suffer to the point that you were broke, nor did your art catapult you into having a gallery show in Manhattan where you were selling, six-figure paintings. So with your kind of 10-year hiatus and the way that your artistic expression came through you in a different way, primarily through body art and changing your physical appearance. I'm curious about whether your perception of who is an artist and who isn't an artist has changed given your experience moving through all of these extremes and then seeing something inside you come out and artistically express yourself in a way that is very visible, right? Like you look like an artist. You have a unique style, you have piercings, you have tattoos. Like if somebody were to envision what a modern artist looks like in physical appearance, it's quite likely that they would imagine somebody who looks like you. So I'm curious how you came to not only identify with your creative self, but also how you like physically embodied it.
So, I mean, the narrative of art being like around money, right? Like it's obvious that it was embedded in my, like, it was ingrained in me in some capacity through my family. Like the struggling artist phrase exists for very many reasons, because I think we were all conditioned to think that artists were struggling artists. You're either struggling or you're not struggling. What does struggling mean? It is surrounded by the narrative of financial success, right? So if my grandmother thought that, and then I thought that, then A and B, like that makes sense. It makes sense that I thought the same thing that she would have basically, I guess, sort of ingrained in me as well. However, something interesting developed, like you said. The more I stopped painting and started to beat myself up for not, like, I would literally have a canvas in front of me and a paintbrush, and I sat there and I was like, nothing's coming. I'm not inspired. I don't feel good enough for this. I'm afraid I'm going to create something that's not beautiful, right? It wasn't even more about a form of expression anymore. It changed. It was about like producing something, you know? For what though? For what value? Because I wasn't even trying to produce something for the sake of selling it, but I, for some reason, gave myself that pressure to think that that's what it was, right?
Where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes from being a black sheep in the family a little bit, and always feeling like I had to produce to be considered good enough for my family, successful enough for my family. Because it wasn't just, I didn't just have that state of mind when it came through painting. That like carried over in every part of my relationships with myself and people. It came through in my work. Like I am a workhorse when it comes to like everything I've done in my career. I worked crazy hours and crazy shifts and never set good boundaries for myself, which is something I still struggle in, and when
You're
you
getting
start.
so much better. I've witnessed you. You're getting so much better.
Thanks, babe. And so when you do that, it's like when you do that narrative over and over in your head, you start believing that it's true. Like I started to believe that I wasn't good enough, and that the only way that I could be good enough for anyone and anything in any scenario is if I produced things, produced great work, produced amazing value. Like I basically created the narrative that the more I was able to put out, then the more I was worthy to be a part of this world for everybody. Right.
I think also with the other piece, which it wasn't just about the production for production's sake, it was the production so that other people could say that it was valuable, right? It had that like
100%.
that validation, because there's plenty
Yeah,
of artists who just create, like they create,
totally.
and some people like their stuff, some people don't. But I think what I'm hearing you say in this is that your capacity for production in terms of how other people see it as valuable is your value as a person.
Which makes a lot of sense, because if we were, okay, look, if we were going to sit here and really dive into the realm of our emotional being, right? I clearly struggled with self-worth and self-value because I was told multiple times in my life by very important people in my life that I thought were very important that I wasn't good enough. So I thought the more I loved you, the more that you would love me back. The more I gave to you, the more that you would love me back. And I think at the end of the day, what did I want? I just wanted to be loved and appreciated and seen. And same thing with my work. The more I gave and put out good work, the more I hoped my bosses and my colleagues would be like, you're amazing. It always stemmed from some form of like, can they validate me for me to realize that I'm good enough? I needed someone to tell me versus being able to sit here and tell myself that I'm good enough. That was, if I were to have life issues, which we all have a story, we all have something we've gone through that created our issues, whether it stemmed from childhood or adult life. I had mommy issues. I had self-worth issues. I had no idea how to love myself. I had no idea what that narrative sounded like or looked like at all. And the only thing I remember from my childhood or into like, adolescence, teenage phase, like beginner adult phase in your 20s, the only time I ever felt good about myself was when I surrounded myself at a museum in art or did art in some capacity. And then I lost that, or I thought I lost it. And I felt out of sorts and I didn't feel like I was myself. And I felt completely like identity crisis, right? Like who am I supposed to be? And it asked the question, like, who am I supposed to be? It wasn't like, who do I want to be? Who do I would like to see more of in myself? I didn't even have that narrative. I was like, what am I supposed to be for everyone else so that they could love me? Right. I never had the narrative of like, I just want to be loved just as I am. Like that whole phrase, like, come just as you are, right? Like that never existed in my like in my vocabulary, I didn't even know that until much later down. I think I was almost 30 at that point where I learned, whoa, that's a narration we can have for ourselves. Started meeting people that were like, this person loves me just as I am. I love myself just as I am. And I'm like, what is this phrase that people keep talking about? Just as they are. Tell me more about this. But something really beautiful happened in that really long time period of not painting or creating art. I got really into tattoos.
Yeah.
And I looked at tattoos. I grew up in an environment where tattoos were taboo. Like, if an Asian woman in my family, we just don't have tattoos. We don't. None of my family members really have tattoos at all, except for my uncle, who him and I joke that we've always been sort of the black sheep in the family. Mind you, my uncle is 50 years old. So the fact that we have such an incredible relationship, even though we're almost 20 years apart, there was something there. We had something in common. And what we had in common was we were black sheeps in our family. We did things so differently culturally that was unacceptable in our family, and found ways to show our family that we're still good people, even though we're different. We like tattoos. We think they're cool. We have odd jobs. And maybe we didn't do the normal get married, have children situation because we weren't ready to do that. Or maybe we don't have to be ready to do that ever, He met his like now wife after his first divorce in his 40s, like it happens that way sometimes. But my family, like, to them, they're like, whoa, that's so weird. Like, why would you do that? And him and I are just like, we don't know. It's not who we are, like, until I think later down the road. And so he was a really big saving grace for me because every time I felt inadequate or not quite right, I called my uncle, and every time I got a tattoo and then someone found out about it and I got chastised for it, I called my uncle, right? And he said something really cool. He's like, I don't think you realize. He's like, you're just considered a woman in our family, or maybe in this life or world or generation, that's progressing. And our family don't really know how to deal with progressive women, right? Like they know how to deal with traditional women. And what is traditional women in our culture? The ones that make babies, stay at home, have a job, and like do that routine day after day, day after day, day after day. Back then those conversations were like, if you ever feel like that, you just call me. Because he didn't understand it either. He wasn't able to say, give me the tools to be like, it's going to be okay. He was more like, at one point they may or may not accept who you are. And you should just understand that that might be the conclusion of your life, right? And that wasn't a good enough answer for me, because what did I want? I just wanted to be loved just the way that I was. And so then I convinced myself that maybe life, that wasn't in store for me. It wasn't in the cards for me to be accepted the way that I was. And what did I do? I rebelled even more. I was totally the child that was like, you tell me that I can't do it, probably going to go do it. Like I was totally that child because I was curious all the time in the ways that I wasn't allowed to be curious. And it was suppressed a lot of the time too. So the more they tried to discipline me or suppress me, the more I was like, I'm going to press that boundary. Don't touch the red button. I'm going to touch the red button, see what happens, right? Like, did you know what happens when you touch the red button? Because you're just going off a narrative that, like, you're not telling me why I can't do it, and you didn't do it. So why can't we do it and see what happens? I was 100% that kid, and I was definitely that adult as well. So the red button for me in my adult life was my tattoos, because I didn't know how to express how I felt at all. The only outlet that I really had was music, right? And I was so moved by music. I was moved by, like, I can be moved by a beautiful piano solo that was just strictly piano, nothing else. And I could have that song on repeat all day playing on my headphones. And I'd be so moved by it that I felt some sort of emotion that I wanted to create what I thought it looked like again, which is essentially, I only thought that I was a painter. I like labeled myself as a painter, not an artist, right?
So you see a difference between a painter and an artist?
I saw then I did. I thought
What
that
would you
like
say the difference is?
I had no idea. For me, I just thought that like there's different ways to label, I guess, artists, right? Like I basically compartmentalized creativity, right? Like I was like, there's painters, there's people who make music, there's people who draw, right? There's people who are sculpturists, right? But I never thought that all those categories were just artists. I split them up, but they're artists, but I compartmentalized them. I categorized them as different things. And I don't really know why.
And what do you have a sense of why the identity of a painter felt accessible to you, but the identity of an artist didn't?
No, I don't know, to be honest. Maybe that's still something in my journey that I don't quite understand yet. Um, and maybe that did have something to do with like monetary value. Like maybe the artist of someone who creates music is more successful than someone who creates art through painting. You know, I think that I categorized them based on what was the successful value. Like a musical artist was more successful than a painter in my mind, which is not the case because there's plenty of artists out there with different mixed medias in all capacities that are successful, or just ones that don't even have to be successful and they just create art because it's beautiful.
Yeah, I think there's two ways that we're talking about artists without necessarily defining the categories. One is an artist, which is an identity. The other is a professional artist, which is a job. Those are different things. It's the same thing as like being athletic or being a professional athlete, right? Like, yeah, professional athlete gets paid by somebody else to play the sports, but an athlete does athletics because it's enjoyable for them or there's some type of meaning. And when it comes to the creative spaces, we tend to not make that differentiation. And so we don't say somebody is an artist unless they're a professional paid artist. Like that's the qualifier that then is like, okay, I can wear that hat because I've sold a piece of my artistic output.
And I didn't know the difference, I didn't. And I mean, even now, if since we're talking about creativity and tapping into it, I'm just newly tapping into my creativity again after a very long time of suppressing what was creativity for me. Before I was able to, I think I painted my first painting after 10 years of not painting, I think a couple years ago. And that was through a journey of self-love, which you have been very privy to and helped in that path for me, which I'm still on. I mean, we're always on it, right? And some days are easier than others. But if we're going back to my tattoos for me became another outlet of I basically did what I did when I was a kid again. I found another form of expression for my emotions. And instead of it being a painting or a drawing this time, like I did when I was younger, in my adult life, it became tattoos, right? Like I wanted clearly to express how I felt, but I didn't know how to do it. And then tattoos just became that outlet for me. Instead of it being a canvas and a brush now, it was tattoo work. And it was really hard. That transition was super hard for my family. And it was super hard for me because they made me feel even worse as a woman. I had family members that were like, how could any man love you if you have tattoos? What are people going to think about you with your tattoos? How are you going to have work if someone sees sees your tattoos as far as career, right? Because now I physically have visible ones that unless I use crazy makeup, I can't hide, right? And did I let those fears completely seep into my mental state? 100%. I convinced myself, like, oh my God, did I do a horrible thing? Am I never going to get a job? I'm never going to have someone that loves me because I have a tattoo. I started even dating differently. I had to like disclaimer to people that I had tattoos. Why am I disclaimering to people that I have tattoos? That's not necessary, right? They're going to find that out and they're going to react the way that they're going to react, out of my control, whether they like it or not, right? But that was the narrative that I didn't have a few years ago. A few years ago, I was completely insecure, still seeking validation, right? But tattoos never were for validation for me. It was like I loved them. And then weirdly enough, I also liked getting them. It was like a weird hurt so good type of pain, right? It was like, it's weird. I think there's, you probably know this theory more, but like when someone suffers from like anxiety or feeling really anxious or something, sometimes there's a thing where you give them a hug, right? Like almost like a weighted blanket or a pressure. It's like putting pressure on them and it completely slows down their feeling of anxiety or having a panic attack, right? For me, when I'm at in a tattoo parlor or shop and getting a tattoo, that feeling of getting tatted felt good to me. It was nice, you know, maybe it was like because I wanted to know that my skin felt things and feelings, you know, but then it was more ingrained in my emotion as well. Oh, I still feel, I'm not numb, you know, like I'm still a human. I still feel things, like actual physical things now. And then I had the artwork to go with it afterwards, right? And a lot of my artwork is mine, my drawings, my designs again. My tattooists collaborated on some, but most of these are my things I've drawn. So I started to tap back into something that I loved, which was drawing, right? And I really enjoyed it. And the more I started to do that, the more I was like, this is me. I can't change the fact that I like tattoos. I do. I think they're awesome. I was the kind of person where if I saw a tattoo on people, I'd be like, oh my God, can I see it? Can I explore? It's so cool. It's so beautiful. Right. They looked like birthmarks on people's bodies for me. Right. Like if we, like, I wanted my tattoos also to be like if I had been born this way, like I was a little baby with all these markings on me, like that's how beautiful I just thought that they were. I thought they were the coolest thing. I thought that people were brave to even do it too, because once you get a tattoo, that's it. Like you can't take it back an hour later. You can't return your tattoo. You know, like
So what do you, if you were to distill the experience that you had over the last 10 years of kind of your creative energy manifesting in this desire to cover yourself in different forms of body art, how would you distill what body art means to you at this point in relationship to your creative self? Like when you look at your tattoos, like what do they mean? What do they symbolize for you?
it sounds kind of silly because, well, maybe it's not silly to
Don't
anybody.
preface that.
Yeah.
This is a judgment
Yeah.
free
There's
zone.
no judgment free zone. Um, like I said, I struggled in self love quite a bit, and I still do. I'm always insecure. And the biggest insecurity I had for me, if on a physical plane, was body image 100%. It was always physical attributes. Was my face symmetrical enough? You know, I hate my teeth. You know, is my body thin enough? It was always like a physical insecurity that then reaped into an emotional insecurity, right? But when I got tattoos, I just loved the way my body looked. It almost was like a way for me to fall in love with myself all over again, the way that I used to love myself when I was little, when no one cared about what you looked like or who you were supposed to be, right? When you just had that childish innocence of exploration, non judgment, you know, we just wanted to be ourselves.
I would love to end on a final story about when you gave your grandmother that painting that you had created and her reaction to that, and how your relationship with her has evolved to a point where she can see and honor much more of your self, including your creative self. So can you
Yeah.
share that story?
So my grandmother, yeah, she's probably one of the strongest. And when I say strong, there's tons of strong women that are different in different ways. My grandmother is like seemingly strong because she felt like she had to be, right? And I think that what was really beautiful about our relationship is I'm her daughter. Like, I'm literally her fifth child because she raised me my whole life. And every grandchild in my family knows that, like, Diem is her daughter. Everyone in the family knows that. My dad's like, you're her favorite. I'm like, I'm her favorite because I'm her baby. You know, it's like a really funny joke, but it was hard. Our relationship was very hard and very tumultuous because she was very strict, like I said, and she had very different values that she considered was the right way of living life. And I think what happened was I progressed. I became more of a progressive woman, right? Single, very travel driven, career oriented, explorative. And it really scared her. It didn't come from a place of like, like, no, it came from like, she's scared. She's scared that if I was this progressive woman, was I going to be able to survive in this world? Was I going to be okay? Because at the end of the day, what does she really want from me, right? She wants me to be okay because she loves me, like, more than anyone could ever love anybody, right? Like, that's the bond between child and nurturer, mother. She is my mom. And instead of me being angry about the fact that she wanted me to be somebody else, I started to embrace more that she was who she was for different reasons on a generational level. So it took me to get to know her more, for her to then feel comfortable getting to know me more. And the more she thought I was rebelling into a different woman, tattoos, living far away from our family, because in our family, in our Asian family, the closer you are to the family, the better, right? Like, if you all lived in the same state, in the same neighborhood, that's like the best case scenario, which I never wanted. And I also, like, I never wanted to share with her my art. Like, I hid my tattoos for very many years. And like mothers do, they always find out. She's like, who do you think I am? Right. And I'm like, oh, right. And the more I got them, I started to see a shift. And it was a conversation we had where I was getting ready for my cousin's wedding. And my cousin's like what we would consider the perfect ideal child, right? Like, he graduated with honors, he became a scientist, works in the medical field, getting married, about to have kids. He's only a few years older than I am. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna go home. And family is always tough for a lot of different people for different reasons, right? But whenever I went home, I never felt like I was myself. I never felt like I could be myself. And I finally went home. I did exactly what any good daughter or granddaughter would do. I did exactly what they want to do. I dressed up, I covered myself so that my tattoos wouldn't show, so that other people in the family couldn't see. I wore my hair in a tight bun instead of letting it run wild. And I was sad the whole trip. And one day we were sitting on the couch and she looks at me and she's like, you don't seem like yourself. And I said, well, that's like such an odd thing for her to say. Like, she's never said that to me before. What does myself even look like to her? That's what my first question was. And she's like, is something wrong? And I said, and I just said it. I said, sometimes when I come home, I just feel like you're ashamed of me,
Oh,
and I feel like I can't be myself whenever I'm home. So I'm going to cry.
that's okay.
And she started tearing up. She's like, I never want you to feel that way. And she's like, and I'm so sorry if I ever made you feel that way, because I'm really proud of you. And maybe she even said it. She's like, maybe I don't understand you, and maybe you don't understand me, but I never want you to feel like you can't be home and be yourself. And I never want you to feel like that I'm not proud of you, because I am. Maybe you did things differently than I had wanted for you, but I'm really proud of you and the person that you came to be, because all I ever wanted you to be was a good person. And you've been that forever. And we found that bonding when we finally bonded. I think I was like 20, I think in my later 20s when this conversation happened. And it pivoted our relationship. She started to become less critical and more, are you okay? Where are you going to be now? And the more tattoos I got, she never questioned them anymore. She's like, you're just different. And it's in the conversation of, you're really the narrative, like, because even when she said you're different back then, it would be so critical. You're just really different from the family. Now it's like, we're all different, honey. We're all different people. And it just what I slowly started to see her become, she was an 80-year-old grandmother who started to tap into being a progressive woman in our generation. And it was incredible to see that, even through the politics of what we've all been going through, the conversations I'd have with her about racism, women's rights. Oh my God, like what an awesome grandma. She became this like progressive person. She allowed herself to grow. Instead of being an older woman that was set in her ways, which most elderly people would want to be like, possibly, right? She'd started to learn more. She's like, because I traveled a lot, right? And I traveled a lot as a woman by myself without a man, which is a really, a thing that family members are like, why would you do that? Why would you travel without a man? I'm like, why not? She started to really appreciate the fact that I was so well traveled, right? Because she wanted to do that for herself. And she spent so many years of her life. She retired at 80 years old, was a nail lady, worked 7 days a week, right? And she started to find value in all the things that I did in my life. She's like, you saw this part of the world, you went there. I want to go. Maybe we can go together one day, right? I think she started to become very curious about the person I am, right? Which was a conversation we never had before, right? Because we had a totally different narrative. And it's really cool now because when I go home, I feel like I can be completely myself. So when it came to gifts in my family, we had this weird thing where gifts in my family, which stemmed from my relationship with my mom or my dad, my parents were the kind of parents that, they tried to actively be in my life, but they thought the way to win my love over was to give me gifts, whether it was money or some sort of like new thing. And I think I inherently started to think that that was the same thing as well. That if I were to do something nice for my friend for their birthday or something, I'd have to buy them something. And of course, because my creativity, I suppressed it for so long as an artist, right? I never thought to gift them something sentimental like a painting, right? And I think we had that conversation too, Brooke, where I was like, I don't know what to get my grandmother for Christmas. And you were like, why don't you paint her or something? Right.
Yeah.
And even when I started painting, remember I had such frustration with it because I was like, it's not perfect enough. Because I think I was still living in the mindset of like, I need to be perfect for my grandmother. Therefore, the painting that I'm giving her needs to be perfect. Right.
Yeah.
And I remember it was so frustrated that I blacked out the whole canvas from the original painting that I did out of frustration.
I
Right.
remember. Yeah.
Which is also how I'm very self-critical, how I was very self-critical when it came to my art in general. It had to be perfect in my mind. And you said something that really resonated. They're like, art is just a form of expression. And when you express your emotions, there's no ideal perfect emotion versus a non-perfect emotion. It's just emotion, right? So whatever you are painting should kind of like fit in the realm of that because you're painting what you're feeling, right? So I started over and it was so beautiful. I think I sent you a video. I was like crying
Mm-hmm.
because I was like so moved by it. And then I gave it to her and she was just like, and she has it now. Like, it's funny because I'm like, I don't know if she's gonna like it. She's never had a piece of artwork from me before. It's not like these like beautiful light colors that she normally likes to have. There's a story behind the painting where it was basically an abstract painting of a depiction of her and I together. And when she opened it on Christmas, she was like, oh my God. So when we like FaceTimed our family, she would like bring the painting and like showcase the painting in the FaceTime, which was really sweet. And then now every time I go home to visit, she actually has it like on a mantle in her bedroom that she could see every day. So yeah, we basically progressed in such a way where I feel like just accepts who I am now. And now our conversations as far as my journey and her journey, like we're both on this journey, which is crazy because she's like, I'm 81 and I just never thought that I would be here, right? Like, especially COVID has been really hard for elderly people. So isolation for her, I think, was really difficult, but also opened up her narrative of, I told her, I was like, you know what? She's like, I'm too old. I'm like, look, you're older, but you're never too old to live your life the way that you want to live your life. You know, if you're unhappy in Nevada, it's okay to say that you're unhappy in Nevada and there's other options for you. So now she's probably going to go live down in California. But it's funny because our journey together has been basically a journey of self-exploration, right? And loving ourselves. And when we don't feel like we love ourselves that much, we call each other. She calls me when she doesn't feel as understood by my aunt or her other children. It's funny because when dad's like, you're her favorite, I'm like, I know, because I'm the person that listens to her and doesn't judge her. And I think she finally sees that as part of my being. And she loves that about me. Right. And she says it. She's like, you understand. I'm like, of course I do. You're my mom. And we got there. It took a long time. It was a long journey, but we got there where I fully understand her. Don't judge her for the things that, happened in our life that, gave me some unhealthy triggers, because nothing was her fault. We were just trying to do the best that we could to navigate this world, right?
Yeah.
And I understand that about her now, and now she understands that I'm a good person. That it doesn't matter if I have tattoos or if I'm currently don't have a job or I don't know where I want to live. She knows and she feels confident that I'm going to be okay, because she's like, she's strong like me, you know? And she showed time and time again that nothing will stop her. And if all else fails and she needs help, I'm always going to be here for her. And I think that's all we ever wanted to know about each other in our love. So that's the journey of me and my grandmother. And I think now that I have that relationship with her, it just furthers my journey of self love, which is incredible, because what was I said in the beginning of this podcast, all I ever wanted to feel was loved just as I was, or just as I am, right? Loved and appreciated and seen. And I finally got there with one of the most important people in my life that I had a really hard journey with in that realm. And that's my grandmother. So, yeah, that's the journey of my creativity.
I see you. I love you.
I love you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I hope that you are feeling inspired and empowered to go forth and explore your curiosity and creativity. As always, if you want any more information about any of our guests or the show notes or anything we discussed on today's episode, you can head over to www.brookeeston.com/podcast. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.